The ballroom shimmered with cold light. Frosted glass chandeliers hung like ice above rows of round tables draped in white, each place setting, gleaming with silver flatware and Ethereum Systems branded name cards. Mine was missing. I stood near the back wall, close enough to the stage to hear every word far enough that no one noticed I wasn't seated. A waiter brushed past offering flutes of champagne. I took one, but didn't drink. My stomach had started to churn the moment I stepped through the glass doors and saw the display screens looping our product launch highlights without a single frame from my team's archive. Then came the moment they'd rehearsed the CEO, Everett Royce, took the stage arms open like a savior. "Tonight we celebrate transformation," he said, smiling beneath perfect lighting, "and the innovation that made Project Nova the engine behind our 1.2 billion leap forward." Applause erupted. Spotlights bathed the screen behind him, which now pulsed with the sleek black and silver Nova logo. My logo. The one I'd drawn by hand at 2:00 a.m. in my kitchen 6 months into rewriting the company's failing back-end system. But underneath it, something new. A signature. Avalon Royce, Chief Innovation Strategist. I stared, breath lodged in my throat. Avalon with her sleek suits and vague jargon. The woman who once asked me if microservices were like spiritual architecture. As if summoned by disbelief, a junior associate sidled up beside me. I'd seen him before, probably an intern last quarter. He glanced at my empty hands and badgeless blazer. "Hey, are you part of catering?" I didn't answer. Just nodded and stepped back, disappearing into the crowd of rising glasses and camera flashes. My phone buzzed. Ethereum HR. Subject compensation adjustment notification. I opened it with numb fingers. "Effective immediately, your compensation will be adjusted by 17% in accordance with our internal equity recalibration process." My thumb hovered over the screen. A voice echoed across the hall. "Let's raise a glass to the next generation of visionary leadership." I set the untouched champagne on a tray. From across the stage, Avalon beamed, waving as her name flickered again beneath my work. I turned toward the exit. The air outside was sharp with winter, and as I walked to my car, my inbox lit up again. The subject line, Role Realignment Meeting, Monday, 9 a.m. By Monday morning, my nameplate had vanished from the frosted glass door of the 6th floor office. In its place was a generic sign reading, Shared Project Pod, East Wing. A facilities coordinator with an apologetic smile handed me a box labeled Desk Contents. Inside were my books, a ceramic mug I'd forgotten was chipped, and a frame note from a client that once called my team the spine of Ethereum. The spine apparently had been deemed non-essential. My new cubicle had no window, no door, and no dignity. It sat wedged between a supply closet and the kitchenette, with just enough room for a monitor and a borrowed swivel chair. They called it a strategic repositioning. I called it what it was, exile by spin. The weekly strategy sync went on without me. My calendar used to be blocked with core infrastructure reviews, DevOps planning architecture overhauls. Now I got invites for things like legacy knowledge bridge and shadow support channels, euphemisms layered on top of slow dismissal. Avalon Royce, freshly minted with a philosophy and branding degree from Cornell, had assumed control of my domain. At her first team meeting, she stood in front of the same whiteboard I'd written out recovery protocols on during the 2019 system outage, and said with absolute confidence, "We're going to sunset some of the legacy logic and infuse fresh energy into the codebase." Translation, she was going to tear out the foundation I'd spent 6 years reinforcing and replace it with PowerPoint aspirations. She had already reassigned 2 of my direct reports. Now I watched as the interns I had once mentored began forwarding process documents I'd written back to me for input. My flowcharts were being labeled as preliminary references in internal wikis. Even my onboarding slides had been converted into PDFs with Avalon's initials in the footer. I answered their emails. I made my comments. I watched. I kept everything. The silence grew heavier with each passing day, but in that silence I started noticing things, patterns, discrepancies, and something else, something they hadn't realized yet, something they'd forgotten to take. It was nearly midnight when I pulled the plastic bins out from under the guest bed. Dust clung to the lids like a warning, but I peeled them open anyway. Inside were old client reports, printed slide decks, handwritten notes on legal pads, and buried at the bottom a slim gray folder marked in black ink Nova framework. Confidential. My fingers hesitated over the flap. I hadn't looked at it in years, not since the quarter we were bleeding clients, and no one upstairs would approve the infrastructure overhaul budget. I had offered a solution license, an external modular framework, and rebuild our system around it. Legal had dragged their feet. Finance wouldn't sign, so I did it myself. Inside the folder was the original contract I'd drafted, printed on company letterhead, but signed at my kitchen table. I had paid the initial licensing fees out of my personal account to save time, to save the company. It had been meant as a stopgap, something we'd formalize later. But they never did. Clause 6 POR stared back at me. License will auto-expire after 36 months unless renewed by original licensee entity LE. Failure to renew within 21 days of expiration will result in full system lockout and deactivation of core services. My name sat alone on the signature line. Marlene Isra. Not Ethereum Systems, not Everett Royce. Just me. I flipped to the last page. The activation timestamp was clear 3 years ago this month. Expiration date, 13 days from today. They'd forgotten. In their rush to polish everything with buzzwords and boardroom bravado, they had never updated the agreement, never migrated the license, never asked who actually held the rights to the thing they'd built their empire on. I sat back on the floor, the folder still open across my lap. The silence of my apartment was dense, but my thoughts moved fast, clean, focused, dangerous. I didn't need to shout. I didn't even need to warn them. They had cut me out of their vision, but their vision still ran on my foundation. And that foundation was about to expire. I didn't make a plan. There were no passwords to steal, no firewalls to breach. I wasn't a saboteur. I was a systems architect, and I knew exactly which pieces belonged to me. So I began the extraction not in anger, not even in protest, just quiet withdrawal. The first to go was the time zone harmonizer, a background process I had written during a chaotic rollout across 3 continents. It wasn't flashy, just essential. Without it, cross-regional data logs would drift by seconds, then minutes. Small cracks. Next came the currency sync layer. That one took longer. I had embedded it deep inside legacy wrappers, disguised by naming conventions only I understood. It didn't crash anything, not yet, but without it, exchange rate adjustments would begin to misalign by the 3rd decimal. Finance teams would feel it first. Then I removed the reconciliation patch. That one I had nicknamed the sweeper because it caught anomalies others didn't even know to check for. Without it, invisible mismatches would begin accumulating in the back end like sand in a sealed machine. No alerts, no red flags, just friction. By Friday, reports in our Sydney deployment started lagging. Dashboards that once loaded in under 3 seconds now hesitated. 5 seconds, then 10. Sales blamed the vendor blamed network latency. Engineering teams restarted nodes and cleared caches. No one looked deeper. Why would they? I was legacy now. A name in the corner. A comment in an outdated code repository. Still, I monitored the logs from home, watching the subtle shift in behavior like a pulse going irregular. Not enough to panic anyone yet, but enough to know it had begun. I didn't take anything that wasn't mine. I didn't damage what I hadn't created. I simply reached into the walls and pulled out the bricks I had laid when no one else would touch the foundation. By the end of the week, the glitches were being tracked in Slack threads with light sarcasm and confused emojis. Just tech stuff. Just noise. But I could already see the pattern forming, and I wasn't the only one. They gave Chloe Venya a laminated badge and started calling her director's liaison, though no such role had ever existed before. Last quarter, she'd been shadowing me on deployment prep. Now she carried a tablet into every meeting, like it was a badge of honor offering commentary on systems she barely understood. At the Monday sync, she stood in front of the whiteboard I used to write capacity logic on and said brightly, "We flagged the ISRA modules. Lots of clutter. Probably best to strip them. My name. Used like a virus. Something outdated and in the way." She didn't look at me when she said it. Most of the room didn't. They nodded politely, half listening. Avalon, seated at the head of the table in a soft-shouldered blazer she'd worn at least twice on investor calls, smiled like the idea had already been approved. That afternoon, I found Chloe in the analytics room, standing in front of the master dashboard, flipping through error logs like she knew what she was looking at. A junior engineer hovered beside her, clearly overwhelmed. They were arguing about anomalies in the client data stream. I didn't announce myself. I walked to the console and stood beside her. "The clutter," I said quietly, kept 17 global clients synced across currencies and languages. Chloe turned surprised. "Excuse me. If you disable the mapping layer I continued the system defaults, it doesn't crash, it drifts. Which is worse because no one notices until the numbers don't add up." I was told they weren't critical. By who, I asked. She didn't answer. The engineer shifted in his seat, eyes flicking between us. I nodded at the screen. "You're seeing null values in Q3 projections because the fallback logic can't process multi-point currency drift without the patch layer. Those modules were built for that." Her cheeks flushed. "I'm just trying to optimize." "Then optimize," I said. "But don't pretend you understand what you're erasing. That's not leadership. That's theater." I turned and left her standing there, the dashboard behind her, blinking red in soft pulses. One more silent warning in a system beginning to unravel. By the end of the following week, the surface shine began to dull. It started with a client in Berlin reporting tool wouldn't compile. At first, the engineers blamed browser compatibility. Then forecasts across the Pacific cluster began returning null values. One by one, dashboards began freezing mid-demo. Sales teams fumbled. Clients grew quiet. Slack threads turned frantic. Engineers posted GIFs to hide their anxiety. QA opened war room channels. Infrastructure leads called for overnight reboots. The term legacy logic drift made its way into a meeting agenda, though no one could quite define it. I wasn't invited to those meetings, of course. I watched it all unfold from my apartment barefoot and calm sipping ginger tea while system logs flickered across my second monitor. Public endpoint errors, latency variance in core tasks, cascading failures disguised as random noise. At one point, I saw someone suggest residual architecture instability. Another mentioned phantom dependencies. They weren't wrong. They just didn't know what those phrases meant anymore because I was the one who once defined them. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. There was nothing to be proud of. This wasn't revenge. This was entropy reclaiming what structure once held. Remove a keystone and the arch doesn't explode. It just sags, quietly, irreversibly. Then the email arrived. Subject, not a coincidence, from Gary Kim time. Saturday, 10:13 p.m. Mio Ginny. I don't know if you even check this inbox anymore. I heard what happened. I'm sorry, but I've been following the logs, and this isn't normal. The degradation patterns match your old deployment grid. None of the junior devs know how to fix it. Not accusing, just saying I see it. Gary, I read it twice, then a third time. He wasn't angry, he wasn't warning, he was bearing witness. I didn't respond, I just deleted it. Because there was nothing left to explain, nothing left to defend. I was no longer part of the system, and the system was starting to feel it. By Wednesday, the support queue stretched past the 48-hour mark. Clients were no longer asking questions, they were issuing ultimatums. Ethereum's largest healthcare partner in Sao Paulo threatened litigation unless uptime was restored within the week. 2 others pulled contracts outright. Avalon stopped replying to threads. Her Slack status changed from in-office to offline and never flipped back. Rumors swirled burnout bad sushi a last-minute off-site. I didn't need rumors. I knew the look of someone in over their head, and she had hit that threshold days ago. The CEO, Everett Royce, sent out a mass email titled, "A Note on System Integrity and Our Path Forward." It included vague promises about transparency, temporary disruptions, and enhanced oversight. None of it meant anything. You can't schedule resilience. You either built it in or you didn't. On Friday morning, I dressed like I used to. Black slacks, soft pressed shirt, low heels that didn't click when I walked. I nodded at security. They didn't blink. My badge still worked. No one had revoked it. The 3rd floor was quiet, colder than I remembered. The server room always was. Machines hummed in constant neutral rhythm, unconcerned with politics, org charts, or whose daughter was running what. I walked to the far end past the cooling racks to the same narrow table where I once drafted a system failover plan in Sharpie because no one would fund it in time. From my bag, I pulled a sealed envelope and a printed system blueprint, annotated complete the true diagram of how everything interconnected. I laid them side by side. The note was short. This system was never hacked. It was withdrawn. You didn't lose access. You lost trust. And I took mine with me. Marlene Isra. I closed the door behind me and didn't look back. The hallway echoed slightly as I walked past the elevator. My badge still worked there too. As I stepped into the rising silence, a new message landed in my inbox, short, direct, and entirely unexpected. The cafe was quiet, the kind of place where napkins came in linen, and no one opened laptops. I spotted Nia Calder before she waved, tall, composed, wrapped in navy wool like it belonged to her skin. She stood as I approached, arms out, not like a recruiter, but like someone who remembered you before the storm. "You look taller," she said with a half smile. "Burnout lifts the spine," I replied. She laughed. The sound felt clean. We didn't waste time on preambles. A few sips into coffee, she leaned forward and said, "I don't want your old code." I raised an eyebrow. "I want your brain, Marlene. Let's build something new. Your system, your name, your rules. You lead it. I'll back it." She paused, letting the weight settle. "I'm not offering a title," she added. "I'm offering a runway." I didn't speak right away. My instincts wanted to dissect the risks, trace the moving pieces, hunt for escape hatches. But none of that came. Not here. Instead, I glanced out the window. The city moved in its usual chaos, horns, heels, hurried people chasing permission. And for the first time in years, I wasn't inside the machine calculating how to stay relevant. I was outside it, imagining what I could build from scratch with no ghosts standing at my shoulder. Naya stirred her coffee patient. When Ethereum stripped you of ownership, she said softly, "They didn't just lose a lead architect, they lost their anchor." I met her eyes. Calm, unflinching. "All right," I said, "let's talk." That night, I opened my laptop and began sketching the first outline of what would become the Lynx core. Clean, modular, scalable, no repackaged legacy, no borrowed assumptions, just pure structure built on intention. And this time, every line of it would carry my name. The live stream opened with silence, broken only by the soft shuffle of camera drones repositioning midair. The stage was dark. The kind of quiet that doesn't ask for attention, it demands it. Then the lights rose, not with a blast of music or flashy visuals, but in one clean pulse. And there I was. I stepped forward. No cue, no introduction. Just me. A plain black blazer, slate gray blouse, and the weight of 6 years of being misnamed, misplaced, misused. No slideshow, no clickbait animation. No one else. "I didn't sabotage their system," I said into the microphone, my voice steady, firm. "I simply took back what I built, and now I've built something better." The moment fractured something. The silence broke. Applause started small, then roared. Not the polite kind executives give each other at summits. This was raw, cracking real. I saw heads turn in the front rows, whispered names, eyes widening in recognition. People remembered me even if the company had tried to erase the record. Behind me, the screen lit up. Side-by-side comparisons. Onyx framework on the left, Lynx core on the right. The same bones, but cleaner, smarter, evolved. It wasn't a replica, it was a rebirth. Within 20 minutes, Marlon Isra was trending. News anchors clipped the speech before I'd even stepped off stage. Tech blogs ran sidebars of Ethereum's outages alongside our launch footage. Ethereum stock tumbled 11% before the closing bell. I wasn't watching the numbers. I didn't need to. I stood in the wings afterward, heart still anchored, but hands steady, and Naya found me. She didn't say anything at first, just nodded. That she whispered wasn't a launch. That was a reckoning. I smiled not for the audience, not for the cameras, but for myself. For every time I'd bitten my tongue in meetings, for every red line someone else had taken credit for every architecture diagram that had lost my name in the footnotes. This time, there was no erasing me. Not from the logs, not from the memory, not from what came next. The mornings at Lynx feel different. There's no scramble for approval, no tightrope of politics disguised as culture. My team shows up with ideas, not masks. Engineers who speak in solutions, not rehearsed jargon. Designers who ask questions first. Strategists who listen before they pitch. They don't see me as a tool to extract results from. They see me as a leader. And more importantly, I see myself again not as a shadow behind the curtain, but as someone who belongs at the front of the room. Ethereum lingers only in headlines now. Their user trust plummeted after the collapse. 3 major contracts dissolved before Q2. Avalon Royce quietly resigned after a leave of absence. No formal statement, just a disappearing LinkedIn title and a shift to private accounts. Chloe stayed for a while longer, long enough to see her name removed from meeting invites and reassigned to audit reports. The title liaison vanished like it had never existed. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. My name is now etched into every corner of the system I've built, not hidden in metadata, not tucked behind revision numbers, front-facing, visible, permanent. Every diagram, every pitch deck, every line of code reviewed in team stand-ups. They didn't just give me the space, I claimed it, and I filled it without compromise. When I walk into a room now, people don't pause to wonder why I'm there. They make space. Not out of fear, not out of obligation, but because they trust that what I bring won't just work, it will last. What I lost in silence, I reclaimed in structure, not through flame or spectacle, but through quiet, unshakable clarity. Because in the end, they couldn't delete me. They could mislabel me, undervalue me, strip away titles, visibility, credit. But what I built endured. What I knew remained. And who I became, they never saw coming. They mistook my grace for weakness, my quiet for compliance. But some of us don't shout. We just rise.